Welcome to part 2 of the Master Series with the Impressionists, and we're going to do 3 Impressionist-inspired paintings and talk composition. Going to Monet, the big guy, that, just going back, that first slide I had was, what was it called? Sunrise Impressions, or what, I can't remember what it's called, but that was the piece that created the name for the Impressionists. And they were, hostilely regarded in the beginning. They were just rejected in every way. But if you look at what they're doing here, it's interesting. When I was a kid, I thought I was like this art kid. And, all the work that I saw as a kid was like Monet, Van Gogh, and Dali. Everybody know those 3 artists. So I tried to go beyond that and think, I'm a little unique. I know a little bit about art. I love art. So I'm going to go explore. And I found other artists that I liked. And I didn't really give Monet enough credit until I walked into a museum in New York City and I saw water lilies across the whole expanse of this entire wall. And I realized I had been totally overlooking the importance, beauty, and impact of the Impressionists. Now you think about Italian Renaissance, you think about like the sfumato of the transition between one space and another, but the Impressionists did it too. They did it in such an interesting way. Here you can't really put a fine point on where one tree ends and the background begins. You can't put a fine point on where the hillside or the mountains or the foothills end and the background or sky horizon is. It's all just this mass of noise and mark and layering and color, and it's an unbelievable reinvention of this idea of sfumato that comes from the Renaissance, where you have now the whole world is this undulating vibration of transience, of light and shape and color. And it is, it's important for like what's going on in the Industrial Revolution and other things culturally, but it's just within the realm of painting, amazing. And it's something we can absolutely take into our own work. All right, y'all, what we're going to need for this second full painting, this one's going to be a blast, is this image of the lemons and then this image from Monet. I actually have a bunch of different images from Monet. You can see another one here. This one's a version of the lily pads. And then I did include 2 different versions of the lemons. We'll talk about that later. But for now, let's focus on our sketch. Now, what we remember from the first time when I did a tutorial with you, we were working on that Degas-inspired still life with the pears. And this time, though, we're going full Impressionist. The Impressionists worked outdoors a lot of the time, trying to capture moments and light as they were happening, the light shifting, the light changing. There's a lot of that plein air spirit in the feeling of Monet's work and a lot of the Impressionist work. So that said, this picture really, for me, it reads like an Impressionist image. It just has it's full of real naturalistic light. It's transient light. That moment that the photographer took that picture, that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, the light was different, and really different. And so when you're outdoors, you're working in nature, you need to work with the spirit and the mind of an Impressionist, where you're working quickly and you're trying to capture the energy of the moment. You're trying to capture all of these things that are in transition. And one of the great ways to do that with Rebelle, and this time around I want to focus a lot more on some technical tools and tips and tricks. So the first thing is we're going to dedicate ourselves to the grunge brushes. Those are going to be our happy place when we're trying to paint in this impressionistic manner. The grunge brushes outside of this impressionistic experiment are my favorite brushes anyway, at least favorite among the default brushes. I love building my own, but as far as the default ones go, Grunge Brush 2, Grunge Brush 4 are some of my very, very favorites. Now, if you look at what I'm doing here, I've just done the lay-in of both the dark and the background values, and I tinted them both, making them very cool. I didn't do a direct translation or copy or rendering based on the colors that are in the picture. Instead, I wanted to find some of those cooler tones that are kind of laying underneath everything. The Impressionists were, as you can see in this image from Monet right there, you can see this image from Monet. It's just this lily pads image, and there's just tons and tons of layers of mark. And sometimes the underlayer, at least in this case, is a little cooler, and he's building warmer tones on top of it. I'm going to try using that same technique here, although I'm going to, of course, do a bit of my own thing. Now, when I get into the sky here, I want to show you, I can lay in, that cool blue color. I kind of tinted it more towards like a cerulean blue, And then I put in gray and lavender and different color blue marks on top of it. And I'm just scratching and scumbling and knocking in color on top of color on top of color, trying to really get this layering effect. And I'm inspired here by the one with the parasol image from Monet. I just love that image. It was in fact one of the first images I saw when I was in high school of Monet's, and it really captivated me. And I thought that was really cool. And I really was inspired, and I went and tried to paint my own version of that image when I was, just new to oil paint. So this image meant a lot to me. I love the feeling of the light in the image, and the feeling of the light is really evident also in this image here, this more sunset light. I wanted to include this one because I felt like the golden kind of warmth of this image, the one from Monet here on the bottom, would be really complementary to the colors that were going to happen in this image with the lemons. So with all that said, let me talk to you a little bit about some of the paint application techniques. Now, when I resize my brush, and I love all the different ways that you can resize your brush in Rebelle. You can hold keyboard shortcuts and drag across the screen to make your brush larger or smaller. You can use the brackets. You can use the sliders that are on screen. You can go into the brush creator and make it so you can make the brush even bigger than its default settings. The software is just made for tinkering. And for those of us that are adventurous enough to get into some of the menus, there's a lot of reward in Rebelle, especially in brushes. So I think, if on my wish list for Rebelle for now and forever is that they just keep offering more and more cool brushes for us to play with, because even though I love making brushes, it's just so fun to play with the brushes that other people create as well. That said, I'm still sticking with a lot of the grunge brushes here, and I'm trying to create a lot of marks that are very small and thin. And in fact, this is a hardship for me in trying to recreate this style, because my training and my instinct is to get as big of a brush as possible and knock in as much of the local color and the values as I can. I mean, just to get it in quick and make it as simplified as possible. With that said, that's a really different energy than what the Impressionists do, and they put in the work. You can see on this ground with the shadows of the trees streaking across the image that I'm using as the Monet inspiration image. There's just so much brushwork and layers of brushwork and paint, impasto paint piled on top of paint. And I really gained a deep appreciation for both the kinesthetic process of how the Impressionist painters work, as well as the kind of vibration that it creates on the canvas as you start to layer all these different colors, tones, marks, color temperature together. Wow, it's just very, very cool. And in fact, it surprisingly reminded me of Gustav Klimt, which I hadn't ever fully associated Monet and Klimt together. But after looking at so much impressionistic example and seeing so much of the brushwork, I started to see these connections between the Impressionists and a lot of the artists that came as offshoots from them. I mean, that's an obvious thing, right? But those connections were deeper and more rich for me than ever before. Something else I want to talk about, though, as I start to paint in on these lemons, is that the direction of the strokes. You have a couple different choices. One is you can approach the subject with a kind of a cross contour mindset, which is that you use the staccato marks, these little choppy, almost shovel-shaped brush strokes. You can kind of lay them on to follow the shape and the curve and the bend of each individual object, whether that's a leaf or a branch or a lemon in this case. Or you can layer the marks on the subject in such a way that it accentuates the movement. So like say you were out in nature instead of painting in a studio and you felt the breeze blow by. Well, you might put some directional mark making that accentuates the movement of the breeze, the wind. And that's what I'm sort of doing here is I'm breaking up the edge of the leaf and letting it sort of feather out into these little staccato marks that repeat out into the sky itself. So I've got sky and I've got leaves, and I'm juxtaposing and layering together lavenders and greens and yellows and blues and whites and and tans, and kind of putting all these colors together and letting that edge of the sky and edge of the branch and the edge of the leaves just merge together. And I found that to be a very fun way to work. And so, and again, it was a bit of a different way of thinking about it. I typically will let my mark making follow after the contours of the cross contour of the shapes. And instead here, I'm just letting the mark be dictated by the movements and the rhythms and the kind of pattern that I want to create across the canvas. And that's, that was a learning for me. I never really ever paint that way. So very, very fun and very interesting. So further, I wanted to just talk about how you can be adventurous with color with the Impressionists. We saw that in the first painting I did as well, but here I'm taking it to kind of a new level. I've got green blues, blue blues, lavender blues, turquoise blues, gray blues, and all kinds of different tones and saturation. And I'm just letting myself enjoy and play and tinker with all of these different things, not so beholden to the photo reference here. And I think the fun thing about it is, as long as you keep your values accurate, you can kind of do whatever you want with the color and it will work. And especially if you're doing kind of this impressionistic treatment of it, you can kind of layer the marks next to each other, and they almost create like a vibrational connection, because your eye starts to read all of these little dots together. Just like if you could imagine, if you looked at a comic book up close, or a newspaper, an old newspaper up close, and you can see the register of the different colors, the cyan, the magenta, and all these colors, they start to pop off the page. You see them up close as little dots, but we pull the print back and you see it as a whole, as just a one singular color. And that's kind of what you get to create within the context of this impressionistic approach. Is you get to do some sort of like physics work with the eye. So, you get to let the viewer's eye blend the colors on the page. And that creates a really cool experience, because you get to sort of, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but when I go paint out in the woods, or I go paint, do city painting, sometimes I deliberate and I can't decide, is that kind of a lavender shadow, or is it kind of a green shadow, or is it kind of blue shadow? And I'll debate, because you can sometimes find, in parts of it here and there, you can find all those colors. Well, the Impressionist doesn't have to deliberate. They put them all in, and you can maybe concentrate more lavender, more green, more blue in different parts. But as you work, you can kind of just address all of your instincts there. As you can see here, we're getting close, and I put a black frame around the canvas just so I could see what it looks like in a frame, because with all of this brushwork and all of this energy and all of this texture, which Rebelle is so good at creating, I don't really think you could do this painting in any other painting app. It's just such a perfect tool for doing this. And this is something I really wanted to speak to real quickly, is that seeing the Impressionist work in person, the Impressionist paintings are visceral things. They're three-dimensional, almost sculptural kind of paintings, because there's so much impasto and visual impact of the creator on the canvas. And that is something, as you zoom in and look at these brushstrokes all together, and you see the totality of what's happening with all the layers, it feels like a real painting in a way that is deep and rich and beautiful. And I am so impressed, and I continue to be more and more impressed with Rebelle the more I work with it. Now, I wanted to also just kind of take a moment and show you that I switched from, I usually paint in paintbrush setting 2, which is the paint and mix mode. It's like, the second most, just kind of like second least interactivity of the mark. But then at this point, at the end of the painting, I'm down in just blend. I'm just blend. I'm smoothing out edges, blending in colors, softening some things, and just using it to sort of couch the colors together a little more. And that's giving me sort of a cheater way of getting more color complexity. So With that said, I think we're really close, and this was an amazingly fun painting, only possible with Rebelle, and I had a blast, and it felt like it made me just want to go paint outside. So cheers to Rebelle for making such beautiful software where we can paint digital paintings that make us feel like we're painting real oil paintings. And with that done, you can move on to the next thing. I got so inspired during that painting by Monet's layers and textures, I started connecting to other artists. Let me show you. When you look at it up close, you start to see this is a remarkable thing. Like it's, if you've ever seen a Jackson Pollock, and you look at like, what is it, Lavender Mist, and you see that this vibrating, energetic composition, which is non-referential. Like we've gone so far that it doesn't even have any hold on an object that we can reference in the real world. It's become something fully, so far abstracted that it's non-referential. Well, we can see the beginnings of that here in Impressionism, and I'm shocked to see it actually. Look at how close we get to Jackson Pollock with Monet, right? Pollock, who's seen as this, this renegade artist in more modern times. Well, Monet was a renegade artist in the more distant past, right? And these two renegades painting very similar constructions of spatial relationships on the canvas, where the one difference is that with Monet, we can still see little hints and indications of the lily pads that were sitting on these reflective ponds. But we're in Jackson Pollock's, we have no point of reference at all. It just is purely abstracted. So we have this kinship here. So that kinship and that inquiry of just looking at the connection between Pollock and Monet drove me to this. I did a deep dive on researching koi ponds, lily ponds, lakes, just still bodies of water where you could find reflections of the sky in the water and then still have that penetrating view into the depth of the water. So you can kind of see both the actual perspective from where you stand looking into the water, down into it, and also the reflected perspective of the dome of the sky into the water itself. And as Monet painted those two things juxtaposed, he was, kind of in his own way anticipating maybe even a way the work of Picasso, and definitely a connection to Cézanne. But I wanted to do my own thing with that. And I am just going to do it on a separate layer within the same document as you saw me working before. And I'm going to draw, or try to draw, this maddening complexity of all of these koi fish inside of a pond. And I'm not going to do it from the reference. I'm kind of going to make a combined image out of all of the references. And so I'm going to use combined tones, combined color temperature, combined kind of pattern and movement. And I'm going to try to bring together all of these big ideas of Impressionism into something that's, I think in the end, going to be a kind of abstract. And that's the idea for this painting, is it was going to be a little more on the wild, undifferent, loose side of things. Like I'm not going to be painting individual fish bodies, times 20 here in this lake. I'm going to be painting just the feeling of the fish and the feeling of the waves and the feeling of the light and the reflections and all of that energy mixing together, and just see what happens. So again, back to my grunge brushes. Those brushes are just my workhorses for this whole project. And I'm putting in mostly darker tones. I have a preference for working dark to light. That's true also of a lot of the Impressionists. It's just a really intelligent way to work. It helps organize your page, helps you find the big shapes, and it helps keep your lighting and the kind of value relationships intact. So go dark first. I'm layering in some cool and some warm tones. I'm really just trying to establish a little bit of spatial depth, while at the same time keeping it all kind of flat, in the same sense that Jackson Pollock's Lavender Mist was a really kind of flat vibration of light, texture, and color, mark making, etc. I'm going to be trying to do something of that, but in the style of Monet, and I'll be doing it with koi fish. So when you're trying to do something like this, I think you want to definitely have done a lot of warm-ups like we did. I think starting with the Degas pairs was perfect. Then jumping into that kind of plein air approach with the kind of a Monet focus was perfect. And now we get to do something more experimental. I think having your experimental piece follow the pieces that kind of root you in an experience and in a sort of way that's trained your eye is what I hope that bears fruit for this project. Because I think this could either be one of those projects that you spend a week or two on because you're really trying to paint all of the fish and do it correctly, or it's one of those that's more of a quicker outcome that's more about the feeling and therefore more kind of an impressionistic approach. So I'm going for more of that. I don't want to sit here and paint these fish for a number of weeks. I not only don't have the time for that, but I don't have the patience for that. There's certain things about Impressionism that really connect with how I work and how I think, and the immediacy and the speed of it is definitely one of them. So where I would prefer to use bigger, bolder brushstrokes and not so much small, choppy little marks, I still get along with the Impressionists kind of philosophically pretty well. So that said, here's where we are right now. The challenge is getting the right balance of dark and light, the right balance of realism and abstraction, the right balance of kind of soft brushstrokes that blend in, using kind of that number 3 setting on your brush settings where you can have it kind of paint and blend. So the paint goes on strong, but it also blends really well with what's already there. I think the key is finding that right amount of mixing, the right amount of contrast, the right amount of warm, the right amount of cool, because it's such a chaotic image. I mean, if you look at the 3 or 4 different reference images there's so much chaos. And how do you bring some order to that and make it look appealing? So here I'm going to try and paint some of the reflection of the water surface, which is going to obscure even more some of the bodies of the fish, and see if I can pull off that in a satisfying way. At this point, I need to both see my Monet reference and my Jackson Pollock reference just to see if I'm staying true to the original vision. Remembering that looking at those 2 images was what really spurred this picture creation in general. And that's something that's fun about this master series. I never really know what I'm going to do until you start painting, and then once you start painting, then I have the ideas. But it's a lesson to us as artists, is that our ideas come from working, because it's when we paint, that's how we learn. You never learn as much about a subject as you will when you paint it. And so you have to just get after it, and you have to try, and you have to fail, and you have to rework, and you have to try again. And that's kind of the nature of the beast. And sometimes it's slow. The progress is slow, but you're always learning as long as you have some good fundamentals that you're practicing. In this case, what I'm trying to do is establish a little bit more clarity around some of the bodies of the fish, so that even someone that's not familiar with koi ponds or koi fish would still be able to discern that, hey, this is maybe water and reflections and some fish, but that's as far as I want to go in clarifying what people are looking at here. I'm having a lot of fun, kind of, again, like I said, just finding ways to blend and mix and try to make it all kind of congeal, if you will. Just make all of these different elements come together and hold together, again, in that tension right in between the abstract and the real, and just sort of needing to soften some edges, again, going into brush mode 4, and using, again, grunge brushes for the whole thing. I think at this point we're pretty close, and I put a black frame around it again just to kind of see how it looks. In some of these images where there's just so much going on, it's helpful to have that black frame as a sort of stillness around all that movement to see if it reads. And I think I like it. There's certainly some tweaks I'll do. Usually I like to sleep on a painting and come back to it the next day, but for now, I think it's great. And thank you for checking it out. This has been a really fun experience, only possible in Rebelle. And what a blast. Well, y'all, this is going to be the final act of this impressionistic investigation. Being inspired by these old masters, it's always really fun. I always learn a lot, and I want to talk through some of those learnings. But at the end, I want to go back to something that kind of more genuinely excites me and see kind of what rubbed off along the way. So I'm going to do a portrait, which I've just done a lot of portraits over the last couple of years, just based on client work and classes I've taught and things like that. And I've always loved painting people and painting faces and painting expression and that kind of human connection. So this image I thought was really fun. I loved the really contrasty night scene. And I wanted to tell you, I'm using these like dabber brushes, they kind of just splotchy, spongy brushes just to do my lay-in. And one thing I noticed right away, I did this painting immediately after doing all of the impressionistic work, is that I felt freed up in some of my brushwork. I felt freed up in some of my color choice. I felt freed up in just kind of being more adventurous. And I liked that. I think that was a really good byproduct of working on all this impressionistic stuff. I had a lot of fun with that. And I had a lot of fun finding some more wild brushes within Rebelle. And I think it's just in general like a good strategy, if you can, to do your lay-in with some of the biggest, craziest, funkiest brushes you can find. And then you can always tidy it up later. But look how cool it is when you start painting this way. You have this kind of wild interaction of color and texture that you can then sort of tidy up along the way. It's an amazingly fun way to work, and it's a really satisfying and freeing way to work because it's kind of fearless. And I think that is the way you want to move when you want to move in that direction to get good outcomes. Fear is something people can read in your work. If you're just afraid of always drawing the wrong line or messing up, that tentativeness, it comes through. You can see it. And so if you're working with kind of like a bravado and a freedom, confidence, that's going to come through too. And one of the things about the Impressionists is they aren't trying to be the world's best draftsmen. They're not trying to be the world's best drawers. They're not trying to show you their mastery of perspective. Really what they're trying to show you is something entirely different. And as we live in this world of AI and AI art and massive global political, there's just a lot of wonderings and sometimes fear and a lot of challenge in these emerging technologies. We are living right at the precipice of another potential industrial revolution. And, and here you can see me painting with some of that energy and that chaos and that movement and that excitement of the brushwork and of the light and of the gesture that made the Impressionist work so vibrant. And here you can see that coming through in my own work. And it feels very current to me in the sense that it's me being me, but also responding to this kind of turbulence in some parts of the world, and then just kind of wanting to grab onto all that energy and turn it into something good. So I just want to say thank you guys for checking out all of this work. All right, one last thing. We're done, but I just wanted to talk one tiny bit about composition and kind of wrap this all up. So let's do that, and we're out of here. Composition reflects our intent. So we can look at these traditional still life here and at the very top, and we can say like, look, there's perspective plane, diminishing scale, objects overlapping. Here we can say non-traditional point of view overhead, but the shadows and the light and the cast shadows on these objects still gives us that traditional sense of space. Here we can look at the disorganized spatial relationships, suggesting Van Gogh, suggesting Picasso, and we can find that in just a normal photograph. We get inspiration from these paintings as we look at these photo references and get excited. Here at the bottom, we have a plein air dream painting. The image leans into light, movement, airy volumes, dappled values, pure impressionist themes. So whatever we're painting, sometimes we can look at these photos and we have a certain intent that comes alive as we look at them. So sometimes familiarizing ourselves with the work of the past will excite us about the work that we want to do. And that's so important. I wanted to just show a quick example of that. Here's some of my traditional paintings. Here's a plein air painting near my home, actually. And just the construction of that space and the loose brushwork, obviously inspired by people like John Singer Sargent, but also, Monet. And then here, Cézanne, Picasso kind of come to life a little bit in this. This is actually an old-fashioned telephone in this woman's hand, and the phone is hugely exaggerated in its scale, and her skin and the different shapes of her body and light and color and hair are all hugely abstracted, informed by my understanding of the past and artists have come before me, but also inspired by the concepts of constructing space in different ways that I've, also been inspired by these past artists. If we look at this work here, we can see that even my construction of the background is hugely informed by people like Degas and Cézanne, but it's not so much that I'm thinking of copying them or reproducing what they're doing. It's that I am arriving at similar conclusions while I'm also trying to construct space with my own theories and my own ideas and my own specific intent. So it is so important that as we work, we consider the artists that have come before us, get excited about them, learn about them, and then definitely take it in our own direction, so that when we look out at these images, whether reference images or as we're walking through the world, we get our own kind of ideas that come to mind when we look out at the Arno River in Florence, or we look out at models laying in the grasses and we see the dappled light skittering across the surface of the grass and across the blankets, right? And so with all that, I just want to say thank you for listening to a little art history message, and hopefully it's helpful for you in conceiving your own ideas about your own work and coming up with your own way of approaching the canvas and how you want to construct space. Thank you so much.